Good morning, friends. My name is Darren St. George, and welcome to another Monday morning program with Sal St. George. If you've been with us before, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to see you. If this is your first time, welcome to the party. This is how we start each and every week, celebrating entertainments, leaders, legends, and icons. And this morning is, of course, no exception. We are heading to the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry in the University of Connecticut. It's located in Storrs, Connecticut, and we're going to be joined by John Bell, the director, as well as Emily Wicks, the manager of operations and collections, who'll be running camera for us today. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. Please share them into the chat, and I'll happily relay those over to Sal and John. And speaking of Sal, let's get to the man of the hour. Sal, Dad, are you there?
Hey, good morning, son.
Hey, Pop, good timing on that one. That was a good one.
I'm very excited about getting into this new museum. We went to the Vent Haven Museum several months ago. It was
Yep,
all about ventriloquism and
yep,
all their puppetry. And now we're coming into this museum. Let's get right in.
yep, absolutely. All right, so John, Emily, are you there? Please unmute yourselves and join the party.
Bum, bum,
Here we
bum.
go.
There
Hi,
we are.
There we are. Hello, John. How are you?
good. Thank you for having us as part of your programming. We're very,
Yes.
very excited to be part of this.
And we're very excited to have you here. What are you standing in front of right? Well, first of all, John, how long have you been with the museum?
I started at the Ballard Institute in 2007, and I've been a puppeteer since the early to mid 1970s in a previous century.
Wow. So, whose idea was to bring a puppetry exhibit to the university?
Well, the Ballard Institute is named after Frank Ballard, who began the puppet arts program here at the university in the 1960s, in fact, which is really quite unusual. It's the only puppet arts program in a university in the United States right now. We offer BFA and MFA degrees and actually MA degrees. So it's an undergraduate and graduate program in puppet arts, part of the Dramatic Arts Department in the School of Fine Arts. And it's really quite unique. And we're a sort of a sister organization to the Puppet Arts Program because we're a public-facing museum and institute that does a lot of programming with performances and puppet workshops and presentations, lectures, symposia about the nature of puppetry, when, where, how, and why it exists. So it's really, it's a very rich program here at the Ballard Institute, and we're always interacting with the educational part of puppetry at UConn, the Puppet Arts Program.
And is
John,
this strictly for the students or is it open to the public?
We're open to the public. In fact, we're located not on the grounds of the university, but right next to the university in downtown Mansfield here in northeastern Connecticut. We're like 25 minutes east of Hartford. So we're in a little town square area with restaurants and shops and apartments and the Puppet Museum and a bookstore. We're right next to a bookstore. So we're a little cultural enclave in downtown Storrs, in fact.
So let me understand. You said that you have students that actually study puppetry.
Yeah. Yeah, the students get Bachelor of Fine Arts degrees and Master of Fine Arts degrees. And after they study with us, they go into all sorts of different areas of puppetry. Some of them end up working on television with Sesame Street or the Jim Henson Corporation. Some people
Hmm.
work in LA. People are part of the sort of live puppet scene, which is very prolific in the United States. People go into education, all sorts of different areas that puppeteers find themselves in.
You're absolutely right, because people don't realize even movies like Star Wars, Yoda started out as a puppet.
Yeah, yeah. A friend of mine, Colette Searles, who teaches at University of Maryland, she just wrote a book about Star Wars and puppetry. And I think part of the challenge is that the definition of puppetry is not necessarily fully understood. By that, I mean to say that we know that, like the work of Jim Henson, like which we have a few examples right over
Yeah, let's
here.
go over. Let's take a peek.
Yeah, this is a the Wizard of Id, which is a puppet that Henson made for a pilot for a television show in the 60s. When I was growing up, I used to read the Wizard of Id comic strip. And over here is a Muppet, an Egyptian servant girl from an episode of Sesame Street. You can see she has a cookie on her headdress here, and the event was C is for cookie, and an opera soprano, Marilyn Horne, was on that episode. So Henson is sort of what people think of a lot of times when they think about puppetry. But what excites us is that puppetry is a far broader area of artistic and cultural and political and religious expression that is worldwide. It's not something that started in the United States or in Europe. It's from all over the world, and that's what our exhibit, The World of Puppetry, talks about. We're very interested in spreading the word about the nature of puppetry as a global tradition with all sorts of fascinating connections to really the fabric of cultural life, daily life. It's accessible to all sorts of different people. So that's what this exhibit talks about. And then the other exhibit we want to talk about is taking care of puppets and their collectors, which gets into some of the details about how contributors to the Ballard Institute have developed as people also interested in puppetry.
John, did you come from the world of puppetry?
Yeah, I started working with a company called Bread and Puppet Theater, which is based in northern Vermont. It started in New York City in the 60s, which is a activist political puppet theater that comes from the tradition of puppetry that sees the work as art or art theater or avant-garde theater. So it's, experimental approaches to the form. But that company uses giant puppets, big outdoor spectacles, puppet circuses, proscenium indoor shows. So another aspect of the wide range of possibilities of puppetry.
When
John,
you
I'm
say
excited.
large, okay, when you say large puppets, is that like Jabba the Hutt? That was a huge puppet.
Yeah, no, much larger than Jabba the Hutt. Jabba the
Wow.
Hutt is sort of a little over the size of humans. Actually, two puppeteers are inside that puppet. But we're talking about puppets. The head might be 25 feet tall. The body's 180 feet long in the
Wow.
largest bread and puppet. But giant puppets is a whole tradition. That it pertains to Asian puppetry and European puppetry and Latin American puppetry and Native American puppetry. A big distinction is puppetry for television, which is or the camera. Thinking of Jabba the Hutt or Jim Henson's work and the work of the Muppets, that's really about working with a camera the way we are right now. And then the older forms of puppetry are about live performance in front of a group of people. Excuse me. And that's where Bread and Puppet comes from. And most of the forms behind me are connected to that older tradition of communicating directly with people, not person to person, but via the material world, if you will, the world of objects, the world of wood or leather or cloth, bone sometimes, the things that people make puppets from. It's a way we communicate with each other, not talking human to human, but through a medium, a material medium. Like actually right now, we're connecting with you via an electronic medium. We're not in the same room. We're communicating through all these different objects. So an earlier and simpler, if you will, version of that is puppetry.
John, is there a differentiation between a hand puppet and marionettes? I mean, are we all in the same field?
They're all puppets. the older definitions of puppetry, which were often very European based, include hand puppets like these here from Poland and from France and Germany and England and Brazil. Those are hand puppets. You put your hand in them. And marionettes are operated from above, but this Italian one by a rod coming down into its head and strings operating the arms. Other marionettes, which were a dominant form of puppetry in Europe and in the United States in the early 20th century, but going back further, include these puppets that were performed or created by Tony Sarg, a famous puppeteer in the US, Lou Boonin, and the Yale puppeteers. And so there are different types of movement connected with those with marionettes as compared to hand puppets. There are also rod puppets, like this kind of experimental rod puppet above my shoulder that was created by Marjorie Batchelder, who was a very innovative puppeteer in the United States beginning in the early 20th century. And she was interested in rod puppets because there are all sorts of connections with Asian forms of puppetry. So sometimes we think about puppets as hand puppets, rod puppets, marionettes maybe, but there are actually many more types of puppetry, including shadow figures, giant puppets. Now we have digital puppets, there's water puppets. So the range is quite wide, and we like to think that we help people understand the wide range of puppets.
John,
Isn't that something what we learned of when they put Lion King on Broadway?
Julie Taymor, who designed and directed that, she comes out of the downtown New York avant-garde puppet world. She also studied with Breton Puppet Theater, and she studied in Indonesia. Indonesia, examples of the puppetry of Indonesia are over here in this display case here. Indonesia has one of the richest traditions of puppetry in the world. It's a very puppet-centered society with different forms of wayang. That's the term they use for puppet theater, including rod puppets like these, shadow puppets like the one above and behind me, and a number of other forms. So I think one of the important things about Julie Taymor's work is that she was exposed to a society where puppetry is recognized as an essential art form, right? It is an essential art form in the United States, actually, but we don't often think about it as such. In Indonesia, they think about it as such. And so Julie came back to the US, developed different types of shows using different types of puppets, including bunraku-style puppets, direct manipulation puppets, which comes from a Japanese tradition, and developed the Lion King with those things in mind. For her, you know, when she talked with Michael Eisner from Disney and said, yes, we should do a puppet version of the Lion King, it'll totally work. She had that confidence because she had the experience of working in Indonesia. She saw what Breton Puppet Theater was doing, and she convinced Michael Eisner to let her do that. And, you know, and because of that, because of innovation, there have been all sorts of Broadway shows with giant puppets, different types of puppets, including shadow figures. And this, you know, represents, or this is part of this language of puppetry that for those of us who are puppeteers, we see all over the place all the time with like mascots and giant puppet figures for Super Bowl halftime ceremonies or Olympic opening ceremonies, or I don't know, all sorts of different ways that objects perform.
Do you have a personal preference in terms of puppets, what you prefer yourself?
Yeah, well, yeah, I like all forms of puppetry. I mean, live theater, live puppetry. I don't have much experience doing puppets for the camera, you know, which is a lot of what people think of in terms of puppetry. But to be in a space with the audience and puppets, whether those are rod puppets or giant puppets. I'm part of a company called Great Small Works. We do toy theater, which is flat, cutout, tabletop proscenium arch theater, where the stage is kind of the puppet. The puppets are two-dimensional paper puppets, but you can do giant spectacles on a miniature scale. We're working right now with in our collection with the work of Sidney Chrysler from Chaplin, Connecticut, who did miniature puppet operas with puppets made out of pipe cleaners and giant, or sets that were like this, but which replicated, the set of Tosca on the Metropolitan Opera, in the Metropolitan Opera. And if you would go in his home theater in Chaplin, Connecticut, and the lights went down and you adjusted your eyes, the experience is like being in the actual opera, right? But the figures are actually quite small. So that's another type of puppet theater that I appreciate, this toy theater, if you will.
I keep interrupting Darren because
Yeah.
he has tons of questions that have been popping up in the chat room. So Darren, take it away.
We do. John, we are 15 minutes in and already uncovering such an exciting world.
Right.
Thank you. So we started today, and Eva put a very broad question into the chat, and she said, why does puppetry exist and its function? And already we received that answer a few times, and we had even in the chat, a viewer wrote in saying the function of puppetry is to delight and entertain. How do you feel about that definition? Does that touch upon the highlights you would pursue?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, to delight and entertain. I think there are many more kind of culturally essential things that puppetry has always done historically, like these characters from Indonesia, from Java, are used to perform episodes from an epic. The Indonesian versions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are Hindu epics that traveled from India to Indonesia. And they're also kind of gods. The greenish character here, who actually is rather ugly, he's got a big nose, he's got sort of lidded eyes, he's green. He's a trickster character, and tricksters are essential to puppetry. They thumb their nose at society. They're in touch with higher powers. A Western character is Punch from Punch and Judy, who has a big nose and a hump, and he makes fun of everything, kind of like the way I think of Bart Simpson or Family Guy or other popular entertainment figures who are, comedians, right? Who are talking about the foibles of society. That's been a function of puppetry. So it's delighting people, but also offering insights into what goes on in society. So also the essential thing about puppets is that, as I was saying before, they're sculptured pieces, or they're made out of leather, like this Indian shadow puppet of a dancing woman, or these Chinese shadow puppet here, which is a puppet of a man holding a puppet, right? Or these wooden figures here are from Vietnam, part of a Vietnamese tradition of water puppetry. So there's the essential thing is that we're communicating, like with these figures from Mali in Africa, these sculpted figures of men in a boat. We're communicating through the movement of sculpture, the movement of objects. If it's shadow puppets, the movement of figures on a screen. This figure right here that I'm looking at is named Ali al-Zibak. It's from Egypt. And the figure above him is a fancier figure, Hammam, who's a figure of authority, right? And Ali al-Zabak is a working class guy, he doesn't have a lot, but he's able to comment on society. You can trust him to have an acerbic and comic look at whatever's going on in Egyptian society, right? So that's kind of essential. This figure, go ahead.
I love that even the shadow puppets are painted.
Yeah, well, there's different types of there are different techniques. This shadow puppet over here, the Indian shadow puppet of a woman with a braid, the way the puppets are built, they're translucent. So when there's a light behind them casting the shadow on a screen, it's a colorful shadow. This figure over here from Indonesia, the Gatot Kaca is a solid figure. So his shadow on the screen is just a black shadow, which is kind of interesting because, as you noted, he's highly painted. But if you watch the show from behind the screen, which you can do, you see the painted puppet. And if you see it from the front, you see the black shadow, the silhouette, which is also very strong. But it's either way, you're connecting with a figure that is connected to epic culture, epic stories in Indonesia. In further complicating this, in the world of puppetry, Indonesia is the largest Muslim nation in the world. So most of the puppeteers in Indonesia, in Java, are Muslim puppeteers, but they're performing epics like episodes from epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are Hindu epics from India. So in this figure, there's a whole history of Indonesia, the cultural influences of Indonesia, the serious nature of epics. You know, the biggest Western epic is the Bible, which was a source of puppet shows in medieval times. The serious cultural work, serious political work, serious ideas come through all the time with puppetry.
John,
There was a question.
Oh, go ahead, Darren.
We're not done. We have questions.
We have so many questions
Okay.
for you.
So there was one question. You're already illustrating beautifully, explaining why puppetry was developed and the function in different cultures, which I'm sure we're going to continue to unwrap as the program continues. Also, can you please point out there's a curiosity to illustrate your oldest puppet and your newest puppet in the collection when we come across them?
Emily's saying that the oldest puppet is it could be some of these Asian puppets, like they're mostly in the 20th century, I would say. Some of them from the early 20th century, like this puppet by Tony Sarg is from 1919. That was performed in the neighborhood playhouse. Tony Sarg also invented inflatable puppets for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which are like upside down marionettes, right? So, you know, those are puppets too. People don't often think of the Macy's inflatables as puppets, but they're puppets. This guy who was otherwise involved with marionettes was dealing with them. So that's 1919. The Indian Tolu Bamalata shadow puppets over here on the wall here, those are from like the early or mid 20th century. So, you know, they decay a lot unless they're preserved. So we have puppets that are over 100 years old here.
We have a follower who's been with us for years now, Jeff, the opera addict, and he's having a very good day today. I want to highlight because we've mentioned opera twice.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing puppets, a subject that maybe we should explore, see if there are any opera museums, because the overlap between opera and puppetry seems to be strong.
We could show you a set from Tosca if you'd like to see that in our Taking Care exhibit.
We would.
Speaking of puppets and opera.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll come in. We're leaving the world of puppetry, having checked out everything in that world, and now we're in the world of taking care, puppets and their collectors, which our colleague Dr. Jungmin Song, who's currently in Korea, where she's from, looking at Korean puppets. She put this exhibit together to think about who collects puppets. And like these puppets were collected and then they ended up being donated to us, and why and how and what do they collect. So we're looking here, of course, at some more puppets from Mali in Africa, which are used traditionally. They're rod puppets. There's a rod. I'm lifting the puppet's dress here. There's two rods here for the arms and for the body. Rod puppets that are used in ritual celebrations for like a good harvest, for example, but also everyone in the community comes out and takes part in these these ritual puppet celebrations. Here's like an antelope with a figure on top of it. You can see here in this the design aesthetics here why African art and African sculpture inspired people like Picasso in the 1920s, or a lot of European artists who were looking to work outside of realism, the Western traditions of realism. And here you see highly developed aesthetics of non-realism. We're getting to opera. Frank Ballard here, who started the Ballard, well, the Puppet Arts program, and also the Ballard Institute is named after him. He came in 1956 to Yukon. He grew up in Alton, Illinois, doing puppets all his life, part of an early 20th century revival of puppetry that began in the Midwest. He liked nothing more than to do puppet operas or musicals, like this marionette version of HMS Pinafore, right? He would ask his students to build, I forget how many puppets. There's like 60 or 80 puppets in this show, mostly marionettes like these here that would be performed with a recording of the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta HMS Pinafore. This set here,
John, before you move forward, could we get a closer look at those three? The three puppets in there. Could we get closer to it?
Sure. This is Captain Corcoran, and he's riding a penny farthing bicycle. And the woman with the blue dress and the parasol is Cousin Hebe. Josephine, a young lady in this pink dress, and then Dick Deadeye, who's a kind of comic villain of HMS Pinafore, kind of flying above. And you can see how detailed and magnificent the costumes are, right? Something like the mechanics of this bicycle. There's a lot of movement with marionettes, arm movement and hand movement. So there's a lot of wonderful detail in these marionettes for HMS Pinafore.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to get a little closer. The detail on it, as you indicated, is marvelous. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yes.
John, how long would it take to build a puppet like those, or marionette like those?
Well, it would be different people building different parts of it. You'd sculpt the heads and make a cast of the head, and then make the heads with that cast, carve the arms, create the costumes. Probably a different person would be making the costumes. So a number of months, I would say. He would typically work for an entire academic year, the fall and spring semester, working on a particular production, and then perform it with the students he was working with in the spring semester. So yeah, it depends on how, whether you're working 24 hours a day or what on puppet building.
There's a question here, and it's a definition of puppetry. Does CGI, computer graphic imagery, does that fall under puppetry? Motion capture, does that fall under, or are we now talking about animation?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is where it gets really interesting. When the Lord of the Rings was being created for the first time, and the actor playing what's his name? Smeagol, I want to say.
Andy Serkis.
Sorry, Andy Serkis. When Andy Serkis was first doing the motion capture for Gollum, the person he was working with, who's explaining the system to him, who was actually a Puerto Rican puppeteer, described it as digital puppetry. So I think it's, it's like when you're working with motion capture, there's these dots on your face, and when your body moves, a digital figure moves, right? It's not a three-dimensional analog figure, but it's the same kind of recipe, if you will. Like when I'm operating a puppet, I move my hand and the puppet moves up and down. Or if I've got a mask on, I move my mask. Masks are part of this language of puppetry, and the mask moves. And in digital puppetry, you move your body and the digital figure moves. So we think of motion capture and digital animation as forms of puppetry, and they're very related. I'm not going to say, well, Gollum is a puppet. It's a digital figure, but it's the language of puppetry. It's Andy Serkis is not performing in front of us with his own visage. He's performing a created, designed figure, Gollum. So that's very much what puppetry is, if you will. So there's all these, we get these questions. Well, what is a puppet? Is that a puppet? Is this a puppet? Like here, we're looking at, we're getting to the opera, but this is a shadow puppet from the, let's see, yeah, Kismet, the musical Kismet, and it's a figure on an overhead projector. These used to be used in schools, and developments in overhead projector shadow theater particularly happened with Frank Ballard and the Puppet Arts program. But we can see this is a form of puppetry involving projected light and objects here. So we're looking not at an object, we're looking at the image of an object. So that gets kind of interesting. And in a lot of Asian forms, Indian, Chinese, and Indonesian forms of shadow theater, the way people think about shadows gets to be mystical and spiritual, in fact, because you're looking at this ineffable light show. I don't know if you've seen drone performances, but now there's performances with there'll be 100 drones with lights on them, and with programs you can make them in the sky look like different figures, dragons in China or other figures. And that's a form of object performance. I would say that's a form of puppetry that's influenced by new technologies. This is, in thinking of opera and puppets, a set by Sidney Chrysler for Tosca. I'm not an opera buff, but I think it's Act 1. And Chrysler was a graphic designer and visual artist who I think wanted to work with the Metropolitan Opera, but that didn't work out. So he lived in Chaplin, Connecticut, which is not far from here, and he created fantastic sets like this one for Tosca. Right. Oh, no, I guess it's Act 2. Excuse me for not knowing my opera. But you can see here the detail of these miniature figures with little sculpted faces. They're made out of pipe cleaners. They have very intricate little costumes. Back there, way in the back, you can see the Pope, I believe, part of a procession. The procession would come in behind this sort of screen upstage. There's the painter working on his painting at the altar. So you can see here how fantastic this wonderful world could be created with puppets. In a way, it's not so much an individual puppet that's the center of this show, this puppet production. It's the whole thing. It's the set and all of the different puppets. Do you know what I mean? It's not like what Jim Henson created Kermit, and that was a puppet associated with him. He often did Kermit. It's not like a one-to-one relationship between puppeteer and puppet. It's the whole world that you're creating with these objects. And that's lends itself to the spectacular nature of opera.
And John, our resident opera expert, Jeff, did chime in. He said, you're correct. It's Act 1.
Oh, thank you. Okay, good. Thank you. It might be, okay.
We have a question, and I think we got the answer in our chat back to back. So we had a question, are there any X-rated puppets? And then someone asked about, do you have any information about Avenue Q? And I think we answered that that question.
Yeah, well, with these objects, you can do anything. And there are traditions of X-rated puppets, often connected with fertility. I mentioned that puppets are often used in community rituals or religious rituals about, like in Christian rituals, the birth and death of Jesus. But in other contexts, like Native American contexts or in traditional Chinese shadow theater, um, celebrating life events, births, deaths, coming of age ceremonies, harvests, and doing things, performing rituals to ensure a good harvest or to ensure fertility. And for fertility, like I'm thinking of some Korean puppets that I saw years ago, the images of fertility often have to do with sexual practices, because that's about fertility. So there are puppets with, you know, genitalia, right? And sometimes the actions of puppets, I'm thinking of Brazilian and African contexts, you know, but also, you know, European context. They will show, you know, sexual activity with puppets, right? So that's not alien to puppet tradition. We don't have any of those puppets here right now, but a previous exhibit we had of South Indian shadow puppets included some of these trickster shaman characters who represent fertility, and the way they represent fertility is, you know, kind of sexually. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting what puppets can do.
John, Emily, I want to say thank you already. This is an extraordinary program, and there's already praise in the chat for everything that the
Yeah,
world you're introducing us to. It's wonderful. There are three questions, and I kind of want to combine them into one. We're trying to understand what falls under this category of puppetry,
right.
and the three categories are ventriloquism,
Sure.
John Winston's work for
Oh,
like Jurassic Park, things like that, and then a
right.
fun one here, electronic football if you've ever seen,
Yeah.
or like foosball, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we could turn around here in terms of ventriloquist dummies. Um, this is I'm Emily's gamely navigating table and the camera. These are
Yes, thank you.
Sicilian marionettes, as you can see, are almost life size. But here is a ventriloquist dummy um, of a character. I'm just going to move your head here, Walter. Walter Ego, and this was a character operated by Charles Ludlam, who was active in created the ridiculous theater, which is what we call a queer theater, which was out gay performers in this beginning in the 60s, at the beginning of the you know, towards the beginning of like gay rights movement. It's Pride Month right now. And Charles was known for his performance in drag, but also his incredible mastery of theater history and different types of theater. He did hand puppet shows. We have some of his hand puppets from his Punch and Judy show, and he did a ventriloquist act. So, and his original character of Walter Ego, or this is the rehearsal version, the performance version is in Vent Haven right now, together with another ventriloquist dummy that Charles Ludlam did. So Ludlam was interested in all types of theater, including puppet theater, like Julie Taymor, who you mentioned, and ventriloquism certainly, you know, satisfies that definition of puppets as objects through which we communicate. Like you operate the head and the mouth, you make the puppet speak, and that's what the focus is on. You know, we're looking at this sculpted figure with a body, and that's the performer. So ventriloquism is definitely a form of puppetry. I
And
forget
then
what
we
your
were
other question
asking,
is.
yep, John, and then the other two categories were John Winston and
Yeah,
electronic football or foosball.
right. I think it's not John Winston. It is, and I'm forgetting his name. He passed away, but he did the special
Oh,
effects in Jurassic Park,
yeah.
which were puppets, dinosaur puppets, right? Sometimes it would just be the legs of the puppet. Like there's a scene where children are hiding in a kitchen and the legs of the dinosaur go by. So yeah, special effects are puppets,
Stan.
and earlier in the earlier years of special effects, like with King Kong and the early special effects artists, they talked about themselves as puppeteers, right? So definitely that special effects is the world of puppetry. And we were talking earlier about Star Wars. Colette Searles, in her book about Star Wars, mentions that the earlier versions of Star Wars, kind of like what was happening in Jurassic Park, used actual puppets like Yoda, which was operated by Frank Oz, who was Jim Henson's partner for so long. Later on, they developed in some of the later shows more digital effects, and which are also, as we were talking about, a form of puppetry. But then they realized that people actually want that, the materiality of the analog puppets. So more recently, for example, in The Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, they're back to using actual puppets and masks. If you look at The Mandalorian, it's a person with a mask talking with a puppet, right? When you think of these scenes between the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, who's actually has a different name. Do you know what I mean? Like those are central to those shows. You can't do those productions without puppets. That's kind of interesting.
That is, and you're correct. It's Stan Winston.
Stan Winston. Yeah, thank you. Stan Winston. Amazing, you know. And a lot of puppeteers work in those special effects studios. Special effects, miniature spaceships in Star Wars, the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, all the different characters in Star Wars in the bar scene. It's just amazing the degree to which puppets and masks and objects populate movies like Star Wars.
And the last category,
Darren, I think of in Jurassic Park, the Stegosaurus that's laying down, and you can see it breathing.
Yeah.
That's the one that comes to my mind.
Right. There's an interesting South African puppeteer, Basil Jones, who works with a company called Handspring Puppet Company. They built a puppet called Little Amal that in the past 2 years has walked across from the Syrian border through Turkey, through all of Europe, and now last year in the United States, representing refugees. And Basil Jones talks about breathing, like what puppets do. You know, in a way, he says the content of the story, the dramaturgy that they do, is less central than just the fact that they're a dead thing that's alive. And the breathing he talks about a lot. You know, when you see a puppet breathing, right, you know, there's this illusion of life that is magical, you know, and that gets at the essence of what puppets do. It's these things that aren't alive, but they appear to be alive. So you can see how that gets to be like magical or spiritual or otherwise interesting.
John, you have 5 puppets all the way behind you. Can you tell us what those?
Yeah. So these are puppets made by Zuni Maud, who was from
hang on 1 second, John. We just lost your video feed. Hold on 1 sec.
Okay.
Yep. Emily, if you can when check, we're back. See if you may have just accidentally hit that camera button. There we go. Yep.
Okay.
Hi, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.
Emily's managing by herself this amazing array of mechanical, electronic operations and schlepping around the camera with these cords.
She's been doing a great job. We got to see some reflections of her at work. So
okay, yeah.
And then there should be a button if you reverse the camera. I think you were using the other side of it. Maybe that's what's giving you trouble here. Jeff just said Emily is a Zoom puppeteer.
Exactly. Yeah. We're troubleshooting now as we
That's okay. As you do, John, there are some questions. You're creating a lot of enthusiasm for puppetry, and people are interested to know how long does it take to learn the art of puppetry, either animating a character or building a character, and you have your programs for schooling. Are there others around the country?
Yeah. Tell us when you see us.
Oh, you're back.
You're back. Okay. You're back.
So it depends. There's a lot of community puppeteers who take part in community puppet celebrations and they just learn one pretty simply one form of puppetry that they perform in a community event, right? And our teaching programs are like 4 years for an undergraduate program and another 3 years for a graduate program. It kind of depends. Traditional master apprentice forms of puppetry, thinking of Japan and China and Indonesia, you spend a number of years as an apprentice watching the master puppeteer work, and maybe they let you build puppets, or you can do like in bunraku, you do the feet, first. And after a few years, you can learn the other parts of the puppet. So in some ways, like with puppetry that involves community involvement, you can jump in and in a parade, here, hold this rod puppet, and it's a stick, and on the top of it is a fish, and you're in the mermaid parade and you're ready to go, right? But of course, for more nuanced movement and to really know how to get particular feelings or emotions or story elements across, it can take many, many years. And, it's like any art form, the more you get into it, the more you master it. So that's a little bit of a sidestepping response to your question.
Thank you.
You asked about these hand puppets by
Yes.
Zuni Maud. So Zuni Maud was emigrated from the Ukraine. He's a Jewish puppeteer, and with his colleague Yossel Cutler, they lived in New York City in the 1920s. They were active in the Yiddish cultural scene in New York and downtown New York, which was also kind of very political. And they did hand puppets, which was unusual for Jewish artists. Of course, there's a very strong Yiddish theater scene in Eastern Europe and in the United States. These puppets are from a very popular play called The Dybbuk by Shin Ansky, about a woman whose parents, her father prevents her from marrying the guy she wants, almost Shakespearean, and he dies and inhabits her body, So it's a very mystical story. Like a lot of Yiddish culture in Eastern Europe was mystical. So they're on the Lower East Side in New York, and they made these puppets, which are they're beautiful sculptured puppets of different characters, like a Jewish, they're all Jewish characters from a shtetl. We think this is Leah, who's the heroine of the Dybbuk. There's an old man, Leah's father. We also have a rabbi and other figures. So they jump-started Yiddish puppetry in New York City at a time in the 1920s and 30s when there was a lot of puppetry as an art form. Puppetry was kind of rediscovered, and people like Eugene O'Neill, who was kind of the first serious American playwright, he was part of what's called the Little Theater movement in the Provincetown Playhouse and other places. And those folks who were saying, we have to redefine what United States theater is. What is it? And they looked around, and part of their looking around included puppets and masks. So we have a marionette from a marionette version of one of O'Neill's plays, The Hairy Ape. That was quite common in the 1920s and 30s. There was a renaissance of puppetry, and the Modacut Puppet Theater, which Zuni Maud and Yossel Cutler were part of, was part of that. The puppets over here to my right are related because Nat Norbert is a puppeteer who worked with Zuni Maud, but he developed on the Borscht Belt, playing in the Catskills and resorts, and then in Miami doing. It
looks like Jerry Lewis.
Yeah, this is Jerry Lewis. This is Ed Sullivan. These are two Apache dancers. There's a femme fatale. So he was connected with, 1950s culture, right? He did television work, right? With Zuni Maud in the latter part of Zuni Maud's career. And as you can see, there's a difference. This is mainstream American culture. Nat Norbert, when he first started, he performed in Yiddish. Then he performed in Yiddish and English, and then towards the end of his career, he was living in Miami at that point. He was mostly performing in English. But, you know, popular culture figures, like you immediately recognize Jerry Lewis. People in the time would have recognized Ed Sullivan, who was the host of this famous variety show. So, you know, that marks the development of hand puppetry in the US from live shows, you know, from this Yiddish context, Yiddish revival, to kind of mainstream popular forms. So I'm answering questions at this point.
You're doing a great job.
Do you want to look at these Sicilian puppets?
Please,
Sure.
please, absolutely.
So these puppets are from a tradition that started in Sicily, in southern Italy. They were performed by the Monteo family in Little Italy in New York City. And these puppets, speaking of opera, the form is called opera dei pupi. And opera, of course, in Italian means work, right? So, but they performed, as you can see, these are knights from the court of King Charlemagne. And it's a very layered and deep theatrical tradition. They would perform epics. We were talking about epics in Asian context, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. This is epics about knights in the court of King Charlemagne. And these two knights over here are Christian knights. And this knight over here is a Moor or a Muslim knight. So in one level, it's about Christians and in conflict with Muslims. And this is in the context of Mediterranean culture, right? The northern side of the Mediterranean is Europe, then the eastern and southern sides are the Middle East and Africa. So in one way, these traditional shows, which would be performed in a series of episodes for over 300 or sometimes 400 nights, right? Each day, in over 400 days, you'd see a different episode from the epic, right? Amazing. These particular puppets were performed in the Monteo family's storefront theater in Little Italy for many years. And in the first episode of The Godfather, there's a scene in an Italian street fair that includes the Monteo family's marionettes. There's a lot of violence, as you can see here. There's fights. These puppets are very heavy. They're like 60 or 70 pounds, and they clash and are thrown together. As you can see by the control systems, this is not the finely operated marionettes that we saw with HMS Pinafore. No, this is like metal rods, and they clang together and have battles. The knights have different characteristics. They're all, you know, they're all different backstories. And you, depending on who you were, you might identify with a certain knight. And sometimes the knights on the Muslim side are good, and the knights on the Christian side are evil. So there's some very interesting nuances about morality. It's political. It's a lot about the nature of Sicily as a part of Italy that's historically kind of misrepresented or misunderstood, or people sometimes look down on Sicilian culture, and some of that's represented. Sometimes it's about race. Sometimes they're puppets with darker skin that are from Africa. We have puppets from a Tunisian form of rod marionettes in our other exhibit, where things are reversed, and where the Muslim characters are the good guys and the Christian characters from Italy are the invaders, the colonizers. So the same form of puppetry looks at things from an opposite angle. And that's totally fascinating.
John, does the museum offer puppet shows?
Yeah, we're just starting in July our summer outdoor puppet show series. We present puppet shows in our theater. We have a small black box theater in the fall and spring. And in the summer, we move outside to the town square and bring in free outdoor shows. So that's starting at the July 20th, Saturday, July 20th in the town square here in downtown Store. So yeah, those are quite a lot of fun. They're really nice. And outdoor puppet shows, that also gets at the roots of puppetry. If you think of
Absolutely.
Punch and Judy shows on outdoors and in town squares or city squares, street corners, beaches, etc.
It feels
John,
like we're running low on time here, and I
Right.
know Darren's going to be cutting us off in a minute, but um, I didn't realize the international aspect of
Oh
this
yeah.
entire process.
Yeah.
How, briefly, how were you? How was the museum able to accrue all these different types of puppets from all these different countries?
Right. Well, puppeteers are eclectic. And as to be a puppeteer, you have to really know about puppets in Asia and Africa, because some of the cultural influences on Western puppetry, on European puppetry, come from Asian forms, right? So you sort of are aware of the roots of puppetry all over the place. And people collect puppets, and then we've benefited because sometimes people have donated puppets to us.
Hmm.
So part of it is a selection. Like when we created the World of Puppetry exhibit where we started, we wanted to say puppets are not just something that started in Europe and with hand puppets, marionettes, rod puppets, and maybe shadow puppets. No, it's a tradition that includes everyone. It includes all cultures, whether they're from, Latin America or the Native American culture, African culture, European culture, various forms of Asian culture, and in China and Japan and India and Indonesia. Iran has a very strong puppet tradition. The Middle East. All of these cultures have very strong puppet traditions. And that's, I think, for me, what's really exciting, that we can look at what's happening in each of these different cultures.
I know we went through two different exhibits with you today. Is
Yeah.
there more to your museum?
Yeah. Well, we didn't really go into where this pink flamingo is behind us. We didn't get so much into that. So people will have to come in person. We have a huge collection of puppets in storage of over 4,000 puppets. Thank you, Emily, for correcting me. 4,000 puppets. Our strengths are United States puppetry from the 20th century, but we have, like any puppet collection, puppets from all over the world. And I think since I've been here in 2007, I've sort of wanted to push that sense of the global range of puppets, because
Mhm.
then, like we're very close to the city of Willimantic, Connecticut, which has a very large Latino and Puerto Rican population. So when kids from that background can come here, we can point to a Puerto Rican vejigante mask, which is a big carnival mask with horns that reflects Spanish culture, African culture, and indigenous culture from Puerto Rico. And you can see your own history reflected in the form, and that seems important. So we're not just talking about Northern European forms, right? Or,
Yeah, yeah.
white folks' forms, but all cultures. Who are reflected in puppetry.
Well,
And that
that
seemed
pink
that unity is
yeah,
great.
yeah, that pink flamingo behind you is great. And you know what? This is what we call a cliffhanger. And we're getting a lot of people saying, "Are you going to come back to do more?" They really want to hear your story. So maybe we'll impose on you and ask you for another date in the future. And
Yep.
we can pick up right from there, right from the flamingo.
Sure. Yeah. We're going to have a new exhibit opening in August, which is about a puppet company that started in the 60s with an African American woman and a white woman in Philadelphia area who were doing puppet shows for kids at the time of the civil rights movement and the women's movement and fair housing. So that'll be a little different, but
Yeah, so maybe we
also
can
interesting
maybe we can
connections.
find a date in September.
Sure.
That
No
sounds great.
problem.
All right, Darren, it's time for you to take over.
phenomenal. All right, everyone. I'm excited to share with you how you can learn more, and I know you want to. So you can head over to bimp.uconn.edu. The link is in the chat, and of course, as always, all these links will be shared with you via email later in the week with a follow-up. You can also head over to their current exhibits. This is some of the things that we were taking a look at today. You can see more about them, and I'm sure we're going to have information about their new exhibit coming in August. Also, please take a moment and hit that donate button. You know it makes a difference. You can see all of the hard work and love that goes into preserving this wonderful story, and they certainly deserve our support. Donate online right there from bimp.uconn.edu. You can also follow them on Facebook. Be sure to hit like to follow along. There were some questions about videos and clips. On Facebook, they have some videos as well as on YouTube so that you can see some of these puppets in animation. You can also follow them on Instagram. They're right there. And they have a very active TikTok page. So if TikTok is your thing, they are available. You can see a lot on TikTok as well. For all things Celebrity Museums, follow us along on Celebrity Museums at Facebook. We're on there. We're live right now, as well as on Instagram, of course. YouTube. We've put up a few new videos talking about celebrity museums that we've visited in the past and their connections together. And one of them I'd like to share with you. We have on the Celebrity Museums page for
attractions.
Johnny Carson.
Let's take a look from the beginning. Here you are.
What Barnum intuitively understood was promotion and marketing was the only way to get people excited. Barnum was actually inducted into the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions.
Johnny Carson tucked America to bed every night. There was something about him that has never been equaled by any of the new hosts that are out there right now.
The Buffalo Bill wanted to expose the Eastern cultures or the Eastern populations to these Western authentic cultures.
Walt Disney was an innovator. He was always thinking ahead, trying to figure out the next thing that he was going to do.
As you know, we're very proud of the work we do and the stories we share. So if you can share with your friends and family, let them know of Celebrity Museums anywhere you can, any way you can, we would greatly appreciate it. CelebrityMuseums.com is your home destination for all things Celebrity Museums. Sign up for our programs coming up, the Alan Austin House, the Volo Museum. We're also going to be talking with one of our longtime friends, Daniel Bubeo, who's coming back for part 2, talking about the making of TV game shows, of which he was a contestant. We're talking about Norman Lear. We have Rick Sapphire coming back. The Twilight Zone has just been added. Lots of fun entertainment for us to enjoy together. But as for right now, let's go back. John, Emily, thank you both so much. It has been quite the enlightening program.
Thank you for coming and seeing what we have here. We're very excited to be part of this.
You really opened up our eyes, John. You really did. We had no clue what we were coming into. This was terrific.
Right. Well, puppets are all around us, and it's sometimes I think they're ubiquitous and invisible. Like, you know, we see puppets every day almost. So maybe other people can start to think about when they're in the world of puppetry.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.